Very happy to have you with us this afternoon with Nick Ciletti of ABC 15. I'm Steve Goldstein. A number of goals with today's special program, including talking about the many facets of immigration policy, how it's affecting people and communities and businesses, what reforms and solutions to concerns and problems are possible. We'll be joined by a number of guests over the next hour and 45 minutes, including some people who've been on the front lines of what's happening. And Nick, our first guest, is in studio with us right now.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you brought that up, Steve, because what we always want to do with these is be as solutions-oriented as we can be. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, right, and to listen. But you mentioned, yes, we are lucky to have John Cohen with us as our first guest. Has decades and decades of experience in law enforcement, Homeland Security, spending a lot of his time addressing narcotics trafficking and other criminal activity at our southern border. Also have to mention he was a former senior official at the Department of Homeland Security, and he also led the intelligence office as well as overseeing a number of border security and immigration enforcement. We were talking off air about what you were doing with folks who overstayed their visas. You also have experience here in Arizona working under the Napolitano administration. John, we could go on and on about your experience. You're joining us here from D.C. You happen to be in town, so lucky for us that you're with us. Let's just get right into it, though. I want to ask you, obviously you have decades and decades of experience. How do you view what's happening now through the lens of all of your experience? How has it changed over the years?
Yeah, in some ways it's changed, in some ways it hasn't, right? I mean, when you look at immigration enforcement, not talking about border security, not talking about narcotics trafficking, but purely immigration enforcement, we have in the past had to look at that issue through this lens from a law enforcement perspective. First, you have limited resources, right? And if you devote all of your resources to going after people who may be here in an undocumented and unauthorized status, including people who have maybe lived here for decades, who work, who pay taxes, who contribute to the economy, who contribute to society, then you're not going to have resources to go after other violent crime issues and other issues that may be more pressing from a law enforcement community. So what we've always had to do, you know, whether it is the work I did in California or the work I did here in Arizona or the work I've done nationally, is find the balance. If we're going to use resources to go after those who may be here in an undocumented or unauthorized status, we prioritize those who are violent criminals. We prioritize those who are national security threats. We figure out ways to minimize any potential public safety issues that come from immigration. It's not the job of law enforcement to solve our immigration issue. We've got, you know, our immigration system has to be updated and revamped. But it is the job of law enforcement to minimize the risk to the public. And I think there's a real debate today whether we're doing that effectively. We're drawing more and more resources away from gang investigations, drug investigations, counterterrorism investigations, national security investigations, from cybersecurity. We're devoting it to enforcement and removal operations, which seem increasingly to be focusing on people who are not violent criminals, who are people who fall into a different category.
John, I really want to hear more about the priorities because, as you say, when they've been put in a different sort of list or different sort of order, I'm interested in the top-down communication. So when we have ICE agents or people from HSI or any other law enforcement department that is under the federal watch, yes, we know what the administration wants to do generally, but how clear is it made, this is what we need you to go do? Maybe numbers are involved in that. Maybe quotas are involved as well. How clear is it and how important is it for that clarity to be present?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's critically important that law enforcement has clear direction from the elected official class on what they should be doing. I think you raise a very interesting point, which is I'm not sure there is a lot of clarity. You know, if you listen to senior officials in the Trump administration, you do hear different messages. There are some folks who are very clear that the focus is the worst of the worst, those people who are terrorists, potentially those who are dangerous, violent criminals, gang members. There's not that many people who fall into that category. We have extensive vetting capabilities that apply to people who are coming into this country at the southern border, the northern border, and through other ports of entry. So the vast, the population of people who are really dangerous, who have come in an undocumented status, the number of people who are committing violent crimes who are undocumented or unauthorized is not as big as people think. On the other hand, you're hearing people from the administration say, we're going to go after everybody. We're going to deport 1 million people a year. From a policy perspective, that's a problem because one, you're taking, as I said earlier, resources away from other important priorities. But two, if we were actually successful in removing that many people, you would see parts of our economy collapse. Our agricultural sector, our construction sector, our hospitality sector, whether we like to hear this or not, depend on labor by undocumented citizens. I think I heard a statistic the other day that 42% of people who work on farms across the country are actually undocumented migrants. If you were to remove 42% of that workforce, you would have farms closing down. We're already seeing meatpacking facilities in the Midwest who are having to shut their doors. That's causing political pressure to go up to national. So that's part of the dynamic as well. So if they're going to be effective, they need to give clear guidance to law enforcement, because law enforcement, I say this with love and affection to my profession, they need clear guidance on how they will enforce the priorities. But you also have to give clear guidance to the rest of society too.
Yeah, because to your point, in talking about the farms, the president has waffled back and forth a bit. First, they were saying we were going to go after anyone who's undocumented pretty much anywhere, schools, churches, farms. And then about a week or so ago, the president backtracked on that. But then other senior members of the administration said, well, no, farms are now fair game again. What kind of an impact do you think that confusion has on the whole process?
I think it makes it a lot more difficult if you're a law enforcement person to know where you devote your time. Are you using intelligence, for example, are you using intelligence to identify those individuals who may be involved in criminal activity, those individuals who may have derogatory information in our intelligence holdings, locating those people, fixing their location, and ultimately taking actions to either detain and remove them or to prosecute them criminally? Or are you supposed to be going out to Home Depot and to, driving up and down the street and going to schools and courthouses and picking up somebody who looks like they may be a migrant? Is it a priority to take people who are here under a legal status, revoke that legal status, and then put them through detention and removal? Look, we have, like I said before, we have limited resources. We have limited detention facilities. We have limited enforcement personnel. We have limited resources to remove people. And if you're spending a lot of time going after people who are not violent criminals, you won't have resources to go after people who are.
John, that's for the clarity question. I come back to this as well, because for a long time we've heard about whether local law enforcement officers, whether police officers, are also expected to act as social workers in some sense. If someone's having a mental health crisis, do we put that on an officer who just happens to be there? So when it comes down to dealing with these different folks on the ground, do you think they know what they're supposed to be doing, I guess, at this point?
I would say, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but there is no area that has been more mischaracterized in the immigration debate than what you're asking about. I have not met, and I work with chiefs and sheriffs, chiefs of police and sheriffs all across the country. I have never met a police chief, a sheriff, a mayor, or a governor who has said, I don't want my law enforcement people to go out and arrest violent criminals. I don't care whether they are born here in the United States or whether they are here legally or illegally. If they're violent, if they're a gang member, I want them out of my community. On the other hand, the responsibility of local law enforcement is to provide for the safety and security of everyone in the community. And they need people, including undocumented people, to come forward if they've witnessed a crime, if they're a victim of crime. So what local law enforcement has said in some communities is that, look, we will help you go after gang members. We will turn people over to you in the jails. We will help you go after national security threats. But we are not going to aggressively support enforcement of civil immigration laws going after nonviolent offenders, because that will undermine our ability to work with the community to address crime and disorder in our community. So that's not the message you're hearing in the political debate, right? You're either hearing people construe it as, oh, law enforcement is being overly muscular and is enforcing federal immigration laws, which, by the way, state and locals don't have the authority to do unless it's under certain circumstances. Or you hear terms sanctuary cities. We're going to protect illegal migrants at the expense of public safety. And neither one of those is true.
John, we just touched the surface, right? Just the very beginning. But John Cohen, ABC News consultant, former Homeland Security official, thank you for some of your time this morning on this special program.
Thanks. Great to be here with you.
Really insightful. Thank you.
With Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein. Right back with our ABC 15 KTAR News Special, Immigration in Arizona Today.
A KTAR News and ABC 15 Special, Immigration in Arizona Today.
And thanks for sticking with us for this special with ABC 15's Nick Ciletti. I'm Steve Goldstein. So much happening on the ground and in our communities when it comes to immigration in Arizona. We're going to turn now to a couple of reporters who've been covering it. ABC 15 reporter Ben Brown and KTAR reporter Balin Overstolz.
Yeah, Ben, I want to start with you. Obviously, we work together. We're friends. We're colleagues. I've gotten to see a lot of your reporting up close over the past month or so. Really just tremendous job of what you've been doing. I mean, just to highlight a little bit, you were one of the only reporters out front of the courthouse that day, probably about a month ago, right, when those folks had their court hearings canceled and then were detained by ICE. You also went to the detention center in Eloy when Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari was down there as well. Talk to us a little bit. You have so many political contacts as well. Talk to us a little bit about how you see the situation currently and what kind of feedback you're getting, at least from the political folks.
Yeah, I mean, to your last point, for your last guest, to his point, where he said basically Trump said, the president said he wants to go after the worst of the worst, but there's not that many that actually fall under that category. So now what we're seeing, when you mentioned that I was at the Phoenix Immigration Courthouse last month, what was happening was DHS was sending these people who had asylum cases to come to their court hearings. They showed up expecting to have a court hearing and see how that process played out. Instead, their asylum case was dismissed. And then after that, they walked out of the courthouse where ICE agents were waiting, and they were immediately detained and taking them to one of these detention facilities, most likely Eloy. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that a lot. I've reported on several different people who've had that exact situation happen to them. A couple months ago, I reported someone who had parole status, and parole was canceled by the Trump administration. So they arrested him while he was doing his job outside of Walmart doing a DoorDash delivery. He was ultimately deported after being taken to Eloy. We saw that after I followed up with some families who were at that Phoenix Immigration Court hearing who were detained. I followed up with them. They were also deported. And just most recently, about last week, a week and a half ago, I actually spoke with a woman from Guatemala who was also told to do a routine ICE check-in because she had an asylum case pending as well. She showed up with her 18-month-old child who's an American citizen. They were both detained. They were ultimately deported to Guatemala. And now in this case, I'll say, which was rare, the immigration attorney was sent a notice from ICE saying, you know what, we did make a mistake. How would you like us to send her back to the United States? Because she had to stay in order to stay here from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So it's kind of what we're seeing now is not so much going after the criminals, more so going after anyone who came across unlawfully or through a parole program.
And Balin, among the many things you've been covering is the ICE-related protests. So what are some of the biggest examples of things that you've either felt like people were confused or scared, or what was at the core of some of these protests that really stood out to you?
Yeah, we've seen the community come out, obviously, on the No King's Day protest, which was about a lot of issues, but of course, many people were out there because of immigration enforcement. But more recently than that, we have seen the Phoenix City Council consider a citizen petition that was put forward by a local group, Poder in Action, where, among several demands, that they were asking that the city does not work with ICE and does not give any funds to federal immigration authorities for this enforcement. And when I was speaking of the community who had shared this petition, there was just a high level of concern coming from people who knew they might not be the target of raids, but who said that they either know somebody who they believe could be, or they were afraid of being targeted because of the way they look. As you asked about confusion, and quite frankly, I think that's what a lot of people are feeling. When Mayor Gallego talked about this petition before voting it down, she said that she thinks it brings up some levels of misinformation, kind of saying that maybe these concerns are a little bit out of proportion. But from the community level, there are very real concerns and fears. You know, Isabel Garcia with Poder in Action told me she feels like there's a disconnect because these are real stories she's hearing from the community. So I think that there's been a scattering of ICE enforcement throughout the valley. We see it pop up on Instagram stories of saying they're at this intersection, and it's causing some confusion and fear in the community for sure.
Well, to your point, we had that happen. I believe it was in Peoria about 2 weeks ago, where there was a false narrative somehow out on social media that it was ICE related, and it was something completely different. It was a law enforcement investigation, but did not have anything to do with immigration. But obviously, the nature of just the temperature of this, right? And how we see social media. This is a question for you both, but I wanted to ask, obviously, I think everyone would agree, of course, there's a need to know who is here, to vet people, to make sure that people are here that are supposed to be here and whatnot. But is the sense that you're getting from talking to people in the community and listening, is the sense that you're getting that people might now be afraid to show up for these court dates and appointments because of situations that they're seeing play out on social media or TV where people's appointments are getting canceled and then they're getting taken into custody? Are you getting that sense from the folks that you're talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, going back to the group put air in action, that's kind of the crux of what they're saying, is that there is more fears of going out and being visible, really, because of these raids, depending on the way you look, from the local Hispanic community. So I think so.
I talked to an immigration attorney just recently when I was talking about that Guatemala case with that woman who's deported and sent back. She told me ultimately that, you know what, she might have to tell her clients, look, if you show up to these court hearings, you might most likely get detained now. So it's not saying like, disobey the law, but hey, I'm just warning you, if you do show up, make an educated guess decision on this, whether you show up or not.
Which some may argue that is that counterintuitive then, because if you want people to follow the law, follow their court dates, follow the rules, but then they're afraid that they're going to be taken into custody, some would argue then that might create even more problems because then they're letting their status lapse.
Exactly. And I mean, to your point too, also, if more people are afraid to go out, whether that's to a court hearing or go shopping or, go grocery shopping, go to the stores, pay in entertainment, that hurts the economy. The Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that there is an economic slowdown because of some of Trump's immigration policies in terms of going after workers in agriculture, hospitality, construction. I spoke to several farmers on background who are very concerned about this and how that's going to impact the food here in the coming months if this policy continues.
Yeah. Guys, let's get in the point to make sure. We did reach out to ICE, offered them an opportunity to come on the program, and they declined. But just want to make sure we do cover that. Balin, let me turn to you on this, because when we see folks in the street who are protesting, it almost feels like there is a risk they're taking as well. When Nick makes the point about whether you show up for a court hearing, that creates other problems. But even going out to protest, did you get a dynamic at all from anyone who, in spite of perhaps an internal fear that they may be putting themselves up or setting themselves up, especially when there still is confusion, that they might be setting themselves up to be lumped in with someone who perhaps is here illegally or undocumented, and they may be like, well, okay, you're kind of causing trouble for us. Maybe you don't want to do that. Yeah,
I mean, I essentially heard that from at least one protester I spoke with who said, I am putting myself at risk coming out here, but they felt like it was an important effort for them to be a part of. At the protests at the state capitol, at least, there were a lot of people wearing masks, facial coverings, because that fear was very much real. It's something that is definitely getting to the hearts of people for sure.
Okay, Ben, I want to follow you. The mask made me think of something else, because there have been people who are concerned about a lot of people involved with ICE and HSI are wearing masks, and that has been non-traditional in law enforcement, let's say. Like if you're out there, you're identifying yourself, we know who they are. Has that been anything when you've done your reporting, whether at the courthouse or other places? Has that been a concern people express? Well, I'm not even sure these people are representing federal departments.
They were just so confused about what was happening. And a lot of them, frankly, didn't speak great English. So I don't even think they were just kind of wrapped up in the moment. For that case at the Phoenix Immigration Court, yeah, almost all of them, I believe, had masks and covered their face except their eyes. Now, we've heard from immigration officials, they say they do that to protect themselves, right? Because people on the other end will go after their families or dox them, and there's concerns for their safety on that end. But yes, I mean, we've seen it maybe not just in Arizona, but in the LA protests, right? Who are these people? Are they actually with immigration officials? Are they actually with law enforcement? So there's those concerns. I haven't heard that here specifically in Phoenix, but again, I think people are just so confused of what's happening because they think they're following what they're supposed to do. They show up and they're like, whoa, wait, you guys told me to come here, and I thought I was doing it right. So
I think to that point too, and the four of us as journalists probably too, it can be difficult to sort of decipher the seemingly moment-to-moment changes in policy, right? Where it's, okay, one day this group has parole status or deferred status, and now they don't. So I know as a journalist, candidly, it's been tough to follow because we get questions from our listeners, our viewers, hey, what's happening? Or I have a family member in this situation. just curious for you two, what has that process been like to cover this as journalists and sort of not even day to day, but seemingly hour by hour, sometimes seeing those changes and having to decipher it?
I think it can be a manner of not relying on traditional definitions sometimes, and really just thinking about what you're actually hearing from the community, and comparing that with what you can piece together from social media and those other sources. Even looking at the definition of criminal immigration, we've seen that sort of used as, well, crossing the border is criminal, therefore everybody who has immigrated in that way is illegal. But we've also seen it used in the context of, no, we're talking about people who crossed and then committed crimes. And I personally feel like we see that used in both ways, and that can make it hard to follow too.
Yeah, I interviewed Border Czar Tom Homan in D.C., and we asked him questions pressing him on, hey, if you're deporting children who are American citizens along with their family, how does that work? How does the department, the administration justify that? And their answer is that we're giving them the choice. We're not deporting American citizens. We're asking the family, the mother, hey, do you want your kid to go with you or not? And that's up to them. But, I mean, if you had a child, right, an 18-month-old, you'd probably say, come with me and not leave them. Who knows where they end up? So that's also an interesting element of this whole thing and how they're justifying who's getting deported and who's not. But also, it's what it seems like, to your point, it's day-to-day, right? Humanitarian paroles ended, CB1 app ended, CHNV parole ended. So a lot of these people came across on these parole programs, thought they were here legally. They still had a year.
Relief for Venezuelans.
Venezuelans, exactly. Yep. And so they thought they had maybe another year on that parole when they came over under Biden, and that's ended. So a lot of them don't even know they're here technically unlawfully now. So.
Yeah, we're a minute till break, guys. So this will be a brief one. Balin, let me start with you, though, to follow up on what Nick was asking. And just to let people know how you guys are great journalists and you're actually doing a lot of work on this. This isn't just like chasing the next fire engine, trying to figure out what's going on. How challenging is that to find the right sources and the right people who are going to give you the proper answers on this?
I would say very challenging. And, just speaking about the job generally, of course, you run into that issue all the time. But, like I said, with my previous answer, when it gets to the point where what could be a singular definition we could all operate from becomes muddled, it does make it difficult. And again, I emphasize, part of that is relying on the community and at least sharing their concerns,
And Ben, very briefly on that.
Yeah, I mean, just doing your due diligence, right? When we do these stories, we want to vet, because a lot of this is a polarizing subject, as abortion, immigration, gun rights, all of those lumped in, very polarizing. So when we do these stories, we got to vet and make sure, hey, we hear the concerns, right? People tell us we want the criminals to get out of here. And the other side is like, well, I don't think criminals are actually being the ones supported. So following the facts and seeing what's actually happening.
That's ABC 15 reporter Ben Brown. Also here is KTAR News reporter Balin Overstolz. With Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein. Right back with our ABC 15 KTAR News special, Immigration in Arizona today.
A KTAR News and ABC 15 special, Immigration in Arizona today.
And thanks for joining us this afternoon. With Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein for this ABC 15 KTAR News special, Immigration in Arizona today. Back to our conversation now with ABC 15 reporter Ben Brown and KTAR's own Balin Overstolz.
Yeah, so during the break, we were talking about a recent CBS News article that came out referencing some new numbers coming from the Department of Homeland Security, saying that about half, a little less, but about half of the people that have been detained by ICE currently do not have a criminal record, which would be in contrast to what the administration said they would initially do, which we were talking about in the previous break. What I want to ask you guys is, in the polling that we've seen, at least in the ABC poll, the president still has a majority, a slim majority, but a majority, albeit, of support overall for what he's doing when it comes to the border, when it comes to immigration. However, we see those numbers wane when it comes to when you ask people about separating families or when you ask about deporting someone who doesn't have a criminal background. But on the ground, listening to people, what's your sense for where people are when it comes to favoring this and not favoring something else?
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, I've talked to a lot of people on the ground all across the valley when we do these reports, and people tell me that they voted for President Donald Trump for his immigration policies, but they really did think that he was going to go after the criminals, the worst of the worst. And now they see some economic impacts happening, whether they're small business owners, whether they're farmers. When he's going after people here in the interior who maybe came across in a parole program, who had a work permit, who had a social security number, no criminal convictions, are now getting lumped into this. So I think people, like you said, the polls are divided. There is a still slight majority in our ABC News poll that we saw, but other polls show that he's actually losing support for some of his immigration policies. So I think depending on how this goes forward, we saw a couple of weeks ago where Trump went back on saying, hey, halt the deportations or the ICE roundups on people on farms or agriculture or different industries like that. He pivoted course and went back saying, never mind, that's back on. So we're going to have to see how this plays up in the coming months, because that is a real concern for people I've spoken to.
I think it's worth mentioning, too, when you talk to people in the community who oppose these things, there's still a variety of views within that. And I definitely talk to some people who say, generally, I don't oppose increased immigration enforcement, but they didn't like essentially how it was being done. They didn't like the fact that Congress hadn't associated this with bills, and a lot of this was coming from the president directly too. So I've heard support for the overall initiative, but not the way we're seeing it be played out.
So that's interesting, because anecdotally, I think when we look at a lot of things that have changed in our society over the years, it almost always takes personal experience to some extent for people to really think about the depth of these issues. And I think immigration probably fits in that as well. But let me ask you both, based on the reporting you've done, is there a feeling that, because I know this from doing debates last fall and last summer, people really equate border security and immigration. And yes, there is that Venn diagram. But Ben, let me start with you. Is there a feeling that now we're starting to talk more about immigration because of interior enforcement and a little bit less maybe about border security specifically?
I completely agree. You know, I've talked to sheriffs at the border who say there's really not a lot to do at the border because there's virtually no crossings anymore. So it really has shifted towards the interior and who's already here, who's been here 10 plus years, right? And that shift is really, we're seeing it here with these different ICE raids across the valley at different local shops, at the Phoenix Immigration Court. So that is a big shift that we're seeing. And I think that's what people have to ask themselves, right? Whether you support Donald Trump or you didn't support Donald Trump, and whether you support his immigration policies or not, what we try to do as reporters is give you the facts. Here's what's happening on the ground, is that we're seeing people who had parole programs, people who had work permits, people who had social security numbers, people who had no prior convictions are actually getting lumped in. And now whether you support that or not, that's up to the listener to decide, right? But we're just trying to give the facts about who's actually getting caught up in this immigration policy.
Yeah, I mean, completely concur.
I was going to ask, let's dive a little deeper into the politics of this. So, Ben, you mentioned this. One of the main issues, if not the main issue from the 2024 campaign, was immigration, right? And you mentioned it. A lot of people voted for President Trump because of his stance on immigration and the situation we had seen at the border. I've been to the border. I've lost count how many times over the past couple years. We had Title 42. We've had so many things happening there over the past couple years. It's been hard to keep track of, frankly. But what I think is interesting now is, I mean, at the end of the day, so much goes back to politics, right? So I think Democrats are now seeing themselves have to pivot a little bit, right, to follow what the demand is from voters. But I think Democrats, it seems, are taking different stances on this. So if you just look at Senator Kelly and Senator Gallego, for instance, co-sponsored the Lake and Riley Act, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation. But what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak more to Ruben Gallego's side of things because that's what I've heard from. And yeah, we've seen him sort of adjust more into that down the middle, trying to maybe court some of the I don't want to say favor, but just appeal to the side where Trump is coming from versus the base, you know, and the people who got him elected. Even yesterday, it's a different issue, but with the issues we've seen escalating in the Middle East, you know, we had him on, and he said some Democrats are being hypocrites. So we do see him departing a little bit from some of the other people on the left.
Yeah, when we did that special in D.C. a few weeks ago for Trump's 100th day in office, I interviewed both Senator Gallego and Senator Kelly. I asked Senator Gallego, you know, in the last 100 days, has Trump done anything that you like? And he did single out his border policies, not separating families. I'll say that. He was specific on that. He likes that he strengthened the border and kind of reinforced border security with Border Patrol agents. He was completely against separating families, but he did like some of the things that Trump was doing in terms of immigration and border security. Senator Kelly, on the other hand, I asked him the same question. He said he can't think of anything. at the moment that he likes that President Trump has done. So there is a divide there. We see it with Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari. She went to Eloy, the detention center. She kind of highlighted some current concerns that we've been hearing from detainees who are in that facility. On the other side, the Republican side, Congressman Juan Ciscomani, he's very supportive of Trump's policies, and he's touted what he's done on the border and how virtually bringing those crossings to zero is a great thing. So there's a big divide, but Senator Gallego seems to be kind of more playing that middle ground here, especially when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Balin, briefly, locally. So we've heard about the federal, we've heard about Kelly and Gallego and Ansari. Have you gotten a vibe at all for at the city level? You mentioned so city councils or mayors, how they're feeling about some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mentioned this petition in our last segment, but just to remind anybody who might be joining, the Phoenix City Council did recently consider a petition from a local group put in action, as well as support from other people in the community that, among other things, asked that the Phoenix City Council and the city does not use any of its funds to cooperate with ICE and federal immigration enforcement. When that was voted down, the city said no. But Mayor Gallego also says that while they're not going to adopt this new policy, the city's values do not align with the Trump administration, and she really wanted to ensure people that we're not going to be really playing ball with ICE in this. And Phoenix city staff was repeatedly indicated that the Phoenix Police Department seems to not really have any communication with ICE, at least actively. That's what we heard at a Phoenix City Council meeting. But another councilwoman, Ana Hernandez, who previously had been higher in the state Democratic Party, she did vote for the petition saying the fact that ICE can pull people from county jails is an example of Phoenix working with ICE. So that's kind of two different viewpoints on that.
And we were talking a little off camera, too, about Prop 314 as well, which got approved. And obviously that's a whole separate conversation. But some folks in law enforcement were worried, well, what kind of a burden is that going to place on us now if we make immigration or illegally immigrating a state crime?
Yeah.
What does that do? And we can talk about that in our next hour because
Yes.
we have another hour coming up.
We do have another hour coming up for this immigration special, Immigration in Arizona Today, ABC 15 and KTAR News. First of all, let's thank Ben Brown of ABC 15 and KTAR reporter Balin Overstolz. Thank you guys for your insights. Definitely appreciate your time.
A KTAR News and ABC 15 special, Immigration in Arizona Today.
Welcome back to this special with ABC 15's Nick Ciletti. I'm Steve Goldstein. We're with you until 2 o'clock. In our first 45 minutes, we heard from a former Homeland Security official and reporters from ABC 15 and KTAR News. And now Nick and I turn to a couple of guests who we expect to have strong opinions about current immigration policy, what's working and what could be better. Gina Swoboda is the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party. Gina, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Luis Acosta-Herrera is a partner with Oracle Strategies and also a DACA recipient. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you both being here. I just want to get right into it. My first question is for you, Chairwoman Swoboda. We know you're a supporter of President Donald Trump's and overall of his policies when it comes to immigration. I should also point out you are a supporter of having a guest worker program here in Arizona. And we'll get to all of this, but I just want to ask you candidly, seeing what's been happening over the past 6 months when it comes to immigration enforcement, and we know that the president had initially said that they would just be targeting criminals, people with criminal backgrounds, but we are seeing people without criminal backgrounds also being detained and removed. Where do you stand on that? Do you support that as well, removing the people who don't have a criminal record?
So I think in terms of the prioritization, obviously we should be targeting people that have a secondary criminal record because everybody that's crossed the border unlawfully has violated the law. I believe what the Department of Homeland Security and ICE are attempting to do is kind of widen the aperture as they go. If a person who is here unlawfully winds up interacting with ICE and law enforcement when they're in the course of executing a task to, crack down on a money laundering operation or a drug cartel or whatever the case may be where they're targeting the hardcore criminal element, which is I think what you're referring to, those people are going to get swept up in it. But people voted to deport people. Like, to be clear, it was a very clear issue in this election. And in Arizona, we passed Prop 314 to empower local law enforcement to, get engaged with people that are crossing outside the ports of entry. So the voters of Arizona and the voters of the United States made it clear that that is what they want done.
Luis, let me ask you about that. So I think that's interesting, Gina's perspective. So do you believe that? There are some who would say that President Trump was elected to keep more people out and make sure that border security was better. Do you think the deportation was an equal part of that?
It's a really interesting question, and I tend to agree with Gina. I think that the president was elected in order to deport people, right? I think that was something that folks that maybe aren't as close to the issue just wanted to see done, especially in a state that's a border state like Arizona. I think the difference, though, is back to Gina's point. The emphasis should have been or should be on people that have committed these violent crimes in our communities, not the men who are standing outside Home Depot or the moms that are taking their kids to school or the people that are showing up to court to do it the right way, right? That's the difference. And I think now you see people like Joe Rogan or Theo Von, the big podcasters who are saying, hey, we wanted to deport the criminals. We didn't want to deport, people that are a part of our fabric of our community.
Well, Luis, a quick follow-up, though. If folks, though, are here and are undocumented, it's from a legal standpoint, Homeland Security can do that. I think that it doesn't, I guess in some ways, to many people, maybe many of our listeners, it doesn't look humane, but it is legal to do, right?
Well, people that are here undocumented, I think this is something that I actually learned over the course of these last few months is, being here undocumented, coming here illegally is the same as, it's a misdemeanor, right? And so, it's the same as somebody jaywalking on the street, right? All right, I came here illegally and now I have DACA protections, but you're telling me that you're going to deport me and it's going to be because I essentially, have a misdemeanor and I could have jaywalked, right? What is that?
Yeah, and we'll get more into, of course, your personal experience in a moment. But I wanted to ask another question to Chairwoman Swoboda. We've looked at recent polling when it comes to immigration, and some of it's mixed. But overall, we've actually still seen a majority of people support President Trump overall on what he's doing when it comes to immigration. I believe ABC News came out with a poll. I believe it was 51%. Yep. So a slim majority, but a majority, albeit. But what we also see is that those approval numbers go down when it comes to separating families and when it comes to targeting people who don't have the criminal background that we've talked about. As someone who is the chair of the state GOP, is there a concern about expending a certain amount of political capital on this, or do you not see it as an issue right now?
So, to your point, there will be a political capital price to be paid. However, President Trump is in part focused on Americans that are making, let's say, between $15 and $25 an hour. Okay, that community is crushed by illegal labor. So we have to address that. That's part of why large blocks of the community that voted for him, that are lawful immigrants, that are seeing impacts in their community, that's still an issue. So it's going to be worth whatever price is paid, because that's what he promised to do, and that's what the American people want done. And there is a wide swath of American citizen labor that is just frankly being crushed. And those people need to be able to make a living. So, if people get picked up off, I saw a news coverage of a job site raid, and I don't know if the employer hadn't done something proper or why they were targeted, but like everybody on the site. So there was nobody on the construction site that was there lawfully. Well, there are low-skilled laborers that are citizens that don't have the opportunity to have those jobs. Perhaps the wages then need to rise. Then the counterbalance to that, and Luis and I were talking about this, is what's going to happen with inflation in that case. So unless and until we can get the work visas, get everyone who's here lawfully permitted to work, okay, in those areas where we don't have labor, but everybody's going to have to go back and touch back, if you will, and then come back in. If we can do a parallel track and have people start their background checks here, have the employer pay the fine, whatever that takes, but you're still, even after you do that, they must go and then come back. That's what the American people are demanding, and that's what the president's going to do.
Well, I have to say that, with all due respect, Gina, I have yet to meet a U.S. citizen or a DACA recipient like myself who wants to work in 120-degree heat building houses in the state of Arizona, or wants to be on the border in Yuma picking lettuce off the fields, right? These are low-skilled jobs that I think very few, I won't say no, but very few American citizens are actually willing to do for the sense that they pay. And so when we're sending immigration enforcement to those fields to pick off people that are picking lettuce, or to these job sites where they're building these houses in 120-degree heat, I mean, it's not impacting anybody that I think, or it's not being a use of a good service towards our community, because these jobs that would be available, nobody wants to do.
Roofing is a job that Americans want to do. So I'm from Queens, and I was in a union back in the day, and I'm married to a man that used to be a jackhammer operator in Local 29. So when you're working in the Lincoln Tunnel or the Holland Tunnel, and it's like about 140 degrees, and there's tar dripping on you, and you're chipping, that is hard labor, and Americans do that, and they're union jobs, and they're good jobs, back on the East Coast, we're obviously in a right-to-work state. We have to give the chance for an American to have the job, like we were talking about the H-1B visa, which is, another thing. That's legal, skilled immigration, and there is a problem because it's being abused, in my opinion. Americans are not getting the shot at those jobs. So I think the overarching feeling of the American people and what we saw expressed in this election was we need to reset. We need to get violent criminals out. Then we need to have a conversation about what we're doing with the lawful visa process, because Americans are not getting a shot at the job. And absolutely, Luis, if you open these jobs to Americans, one of two things is going to happen. Either the wage will go up and people will take it, and then there'll be an impact to inflation, so that's a price, or the wage will not get high enough to get Americans, in which case, supply and demand, the wage will go back down, and then you'll have, the visa worker to take the job. Because I agree with you. There might be positions that people won't take, but you have to give it a shot for the American people to get those jobs first.
No, Luis, I promise the next segment we'll get a chance to respond to that. We have less than a minute, though. Gina, the political science thing comes back to me. It's like a 30-second answer. I apologize. But I'm thinking about Wall Street Republicans versus Main Street Republicans, which I've heard forever. You sound like someone with the guest worker program. That sounds like a practical approach to knowing who's in the country, and maybe they could go back to, if they're from Mexico or somewhere else, they can go back to the country and then come back, and we know that they're here. Why doesn't that pick up more traction? Jeff Flake, when he was in the Senate, brought that up. That seems like a pragmatic, practical thing. Is that a lot of folks not in border states deciding what we're going to do as a country? Is that interior Main Street versus Wall Street Republican? What's going on there? I'm sorry, short answer, though.
There's a lot of that. But I also think that the American people have been betrayed multiple times. The 1986 amnesty was a catastrophic error, and it created a magnet situation. So the people are not willing to have that conversation until we have completely reset the table. Everyone that's here unlawfully has left and come back, whatever the process is, and the border's completely under control. Then we can start to have a conversation about a practical solution, but we have to get there first.
Okay, Luis, we'll get your answer on that after the break. That's Gina Swoboda, chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party. Also here is Luis Acosta-Herrera, a partner with Oracle Strategies, also a DACA recipient. With Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein, right back with our ABC 15 KTAR News Special, Immigration in Arizona Today. Welcome back with ABC 15's Nick Ciletti. I'm Steve Goldstein. Our guests for the next 10 minutes or so, Gina Swoboda, chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, and Luis Acosta-Herrera, partner with Oracle Strategies.
Yeah, and our goal, of course, with this hour, we want to find solutions, and we want to have a healthy dialogue about this. Obviously, all of our guests come with a breadth of experience and a lot of input that we all want to hear and listen to. I do want to mention real quick, we did reach out to ICE for them to be a part of this. They weren't able to join us today, but I did just want to mention that we did reach out to them. Luis, I want to go to you, though. I want to give you a chance to respond to what Gina was saying in the past segment here, talking about the guest worker program and whatnot. Where do you stand on what she was saying?
Yeah, I think overall immigration is a very complicated issue, and we have to figure out different vehicles by which people can come here legally in order to contribute to this country. Obviously we have an issue to deal with the people that are already here, but there are people that don't want to become a citizen, don't want to become a resident, just want to come here to work and then go back to their home country. And so different paths for different people, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think the biggest thing for me, though, as I think about how we would do this, is the fact that, there are industries, and I go back to this, there are industries where Americans can go right now to file paperwork to try to take those jobs from undocumented people, and they just don't do so because the wages aren't high or because the job is too difficult, and difficult shouldn't be the word I use, but it's just, one of those jobs that's in the sun in 120-degree heat, getting paid cents on the dollar, right? And so people just don't want to do those jobs. I wouldn't want to do that job. And so that's a situation where I think, this labor from a different country could really come in and fulfill it.
Luis, why do you think, and I asked Gina a similar question, why do you think it's been so hard? And I think back to, We can go down the last, 5 Arizona U.S. senators. We can go to John McCain, John Kyle, Jeff Flake, Kirsten Sinema, now Ruben Gallego. I know comprehensive, that word, I think throws people off because it's just, oh my God, it's too much. But I think people, to some extent, at least I think polls have indicated this, want to get away from the patchwork at least. Like, let's try to fix this, let's try to fix that. And Gina said maybe that won't happen until people really feel like the border is secure. But why do you think it's been such a challenge so far to get enough people? Because the Gang of Eight looked like there might be, and when President George W. Bush was in office, it looked like there was momentum for this, and then it stopped. What's stopping it from happening, and do you have any reason to think that might change in the next year to 2 to 4 years?
Yeah, I'll give you my opinion. I think that it doesn't get done because it's an issue that people love to mobilize for their electorate every election cycle, Democrats and Republicans. As somebody who works in this industry, who's worked for both Democrats and Republicans, I can tell you that when the issue comes up and when they're in their primaries or in their generals against in a competitive district, the issue comes up and they love to just play on it. And so there's no, I'll say, there's no backbone in some of these politicians to get something done.
Yeah. Gina, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's a problem with political will, and I think the base of the Republican Party has been betrayed, and I use that word advisedly. And I've mentioned that before. The Eric Cantor Dave Brat primary was a direct result of an attempt to pass amnesty after the Tea Party. That is not what those guys got the House to do. So now we're at a point where people don't trust them when they say, to your point, comprehensive or omnibus. So yes, so and that is why I believe that President Trump is the only one who can do this, and I believe that we can get there. We are a hopeful people in this country, and he wants to bring us into this golden age. And to do that, we're going to have to work together and figure it out. But it's going to have to start, because you saw that the other day. You were mentioning that earlier, right? Where we said, okay, we're going to take a pause on this kind of raid and focus on this. And there was an immediate reaction. And you know, it's like the immune system of the base, it's like, boom, that, you know, and shuts it down. So for us to get there, it's going to have to be made clear that we're keeping our word. And our word was, everybody's got to go. Everybody's got to go touch home base. If you can come back on a visa and we can clear you and there's a chance for an American to get a job, don't take the job, great. But if not, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I would just ask you, we have a couple minutes left in this segment. Obviously, living here in Arizona, we know how important immigration is and the border. I was just recently in Yuma. I lived and worked in Yuma for 2 years as well as a reporter. In a perfect world, which I know we don't live in a perfect world, but for purposes of being solutions-based here in this conversation, what would you like to see change in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years?
I'll jump in here and I'll say that I think it would be critical for a group of Republicans and Democrats to grow a spine and to do it. But on paper, I'd love to see some level of comprehensive immigration reform. That includes a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. That includes a pathway to citizenship for DAPA, the Deferred Action Parents, that vets people accordingly, that puts money into the border to make sure that our law enforcement has the resources that they need in order to go after people that bring drugs or smuggle people, et cetera. And that there is a comprehensive way to go after the people that are breaking serious laws here in the country. I mean, I'll speak and I'll just say this out loud. I don't think that this country owes us anything or that we deserve anything. I think as a group of immigrants and folks who are undocumented, we just want the opportunity to give back to the country that we love so much.
I love that about you. And you're clearly a good man in a situation as a dreamer, wanting to be whole, to be made whole, which is beautiful. American children have dreams too, and American parents have dreams for them to be able to have a position. And anything that is perceived as rewarding the behavior is going to be a no-go at this point in time where we are right now. Because, again, it is a magnet. that this is we got here because of the '86 amnesty. People are like, well, there might be another one. Let me come, and to then take people who are here and then are here, again through no volition of your own, right? Were brought here. That was a crime. When someone's parent commits a crime, they get separated from their parent. Like we were talking about this with the ICE raids, right? They go to jail if they get convicted, and their child now doesn't have their parent. So, there are repercussions to committing unlawful actions, and the United States has to be based on law and order. And that was the huge turning point and the pivot point of this entire campaign. And the president's got to keep the promise. Hopefully the American promise, which is, I think, what you're talking about, Luis, which we want to be a shining city on a hill and be a beacon and bring people here. That can only happen if we do it lawfully. And it is complex, and it will take comprehension, and it will take the spine.
Luis, do you as a DACA recipient feel under even more of a spotlight than you did before with the Obama administration and even the Biden administration? Do you feel like even though you've accomplished a lot in this country, and as Gina said, was not of your own volition, do you feel like because there's more aggressiveness right now, for good reason, voters voted for most of that, do you feel less safe than you did before?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I'll just speak very candidly. If I get a text message or if I see on social media that there's a raid on 43rd Avenue, McDowell, or up in Peoria, like there was that other day that turned out not to be a raid, I will actively avoid it. And I do that because even though I have a certain level of protections, I think what we've seen under this administration is that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution does not matter, and people who are in my situation do not have a day in court anymore. We will get picked up, and in less than 2-3 hours, we will be on a plane to, God knows where.
Yeah, I know we have about 30 seconds left, but I want to thank you both for being with us. Arizona GOP Chairwoman Gina Swoboda and Elisa Acosta-Herrera, who is a DACA recipient and a partner at Oracle Strategies, a former campaign manager, we should point out, too, for Mike Bloomberg. I want to thank you both for, I know obviously didn't agree on everything. That's okay. I think that is such a representation of where America is on all of this. There's some things you agree on, some you don't. I appreciate that this was a civilized conversation, though, where everyone can make sure their voice is heard.
Yeah, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein. Right back with our ABC 15 KTAR News Special, Immigration in Arizona Today, as we hear two other perspectives. Stay with us. Welcome back with ABC 15's Nick Ciletti. I'm Steve Goldstein. This is the ABC 15 KTAR News Special, Immigration in Arizona Today. We have two more guests we're excited to tell you about. Immigration attorney Margarita Silva, who's practiced law for 30 years. Her areas of focus are deportation defense and family immigration, as well as criminal defense. She also serves on the board of the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project. Margarita, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And also with us is Justin Harris. He is vice chair of the Border Security Alliance, an organization advocating for policies that secure the border and combat human trafficking, drug smuggling, and other criminal actions along the border. He has served in law enforcement for 30 years. Justin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you both. Two Arizona natives, I should point out as well. Margarita, I want to start with you, though. You have decades of experience as an attorney. Sometimes it seems day to day, moment by moment, there have just been so many changes to the immigration process. People who have different levels of status and protection have seen it go away. What are you hearing on the ground from your clients as you try to navigate this new landscape?
Well, yes, thanks for asking that question. Sorry, I'm not hearing this right. So I have been have had the privilege of practicing immigration law through several different presidential administrations. So I have seen changes over time, and I can tell you that as of today, people are scared like they have not been in the past, and it is a little bit frustrating, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit more, but people are scared, and it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, scared to the point where they're not wanting to go to court dates, where they're not wanting to follow through with the process, or dive deeper into that fear.
Sure, yeah, and it's all of the above. So there's always been a policy of law enforcement and this is just a general policy, not just immigration. It's with all law enforcement where there's a general policy. You don't go into someone's home, of course, without a warrant. You stay away from other courtrooms. You stay away from churches. You stay away from hospitals. You don't go arrest someone when their spouse is having a baby. And those are just general policies, and I think those are good policies. That does not exist anymore. Courts want to encourage people to go and handle their cases. And when people hear that they may be going to court, they may be going to their child's graduation, they may be attending a medical appointment, that there's a chance that they're going to be detained there, that causes chaos, that causes fear, and it causes real damages to families.
Justin, tell us what you're seeing, because there's no question, we've had several guests on so far to talk about this, that a lot of Americans who voted for President Trump voted because they wanted more border security. They wanted to see fewer people coming across the border. They also wanted to see immigration enforcement, immigration crackdown. Can you give me an idea of what you're seeing right now in terms of is that effective, and is that what we're seeing? Because there are other people who are expressing concerns, like what I'm seeing on the border, a little bit scared of what I'm seeing in the interior enforcement aspect of it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can tell you that Trump's policies, he ran on wanting to secure the border, basically it's a matter of national security. So what we're seeing is a stark contrast, the difference between 4 years of the Biden administration where borders were wide open. And now you have Trump that ran a campaign that we're going to shut down the border, we're going to enforce immigration laws. Not Trump's policies, but immigration laws, but keep referring to as Trump policies. So if Trump's policy is enforcing the immigration laws, then I guess they're his policies. But they're immigration laws that were formed by Congress. So it's just a stark difference in the enforcement of those existing laws that are in place. And I think the damage that I think is being done in the communities is the misinformation, but more importantly, the disinformation being thrown out there on social media. And an example of that would be, we literally saw some college kids in a park dressed up in what looked like ICE outfits and bagging people's heads over to post on social media. It had nothing to do with ICE. It had nothing to do with a lawful detention or arrest. But there are people that are utilizing this to play one side of the political aisle or the other. And that's just a shame, because what we're seeing right now is there is a lot of fear. And being a Valley native and being in law enforcement in the state for over 30 years, it breaks my heart to see that people want to be that destructive and harmful intentionally to try to scare immigrants that are in this country. It's unfortunate that that's happening, but it is.
Yeah, this is a question for both of you, but I'll start with you, Justin. Obviously, there is a need to make sure that the border is secure, and I think most people would agree with that. But then there's also a need to have some sort of a way for immigrants legally to come into the country. So I'll start with you, Justin, but how do you balance that of making sure the border is secure, but then also making sure that there is a healthy immigration system that's also secure?
Well, I think it starts with people just following the rule of law, meaning if your first step into the country is to go through an unauthorized entry point, you've already broken the law. And that's some other information that's out there that's inaccurate, that this is a civil issue. If you come through the border, through an unauthorized entry point, you're here illegally, so your first step into this country has been illegal. It's a criminal act. So by changing the conduct of the people that want to come here through the port of entries legally, so they're identified. And that's the biggest portion of this, is if people come here legally through our port of entries, they go through a process. And yeah, it's a long and arduous process, but every country in the world has these same processes. It starts by people that want to come here following the law, following the rules that are currently in place, and looking at some other, not comprehensive reform, but maybe adding to the current laws that we have in place for guest worker programs, because we obviously need the workers, right? But there's got to be an easier process for that. And personally, for me, I think those are pretty easy decisions to make when you're doing it for the right reasons. But both sides of the political spectrum, we have other people that just don't want to seem to do the right thing. They want to point blame at each other. And that's causing a lot of harm. So if they came here just legally through the port of entry, follow the processes of the law, I think that would solve a lot of the questions, because by doing it the other way, we're only helping the cartels grow at record paces through illegal ports of entry, extortion, kidnapping, illegal drug sales. They're one of the fastest growing industries in the world, but nobody's tracking it. And they're doing it through drugs, people, and other illegal activities.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance to respond to that. Margarita, how do you see it?
Oh, sure. Well, yes. I think we can all agree in here in this room and everywhere that we think that people should follow the rule of law. That's very important. But there's so much more nuance to it than, well, you crossed the border illegally, that's the end of it. Asylum law actually allows a person to cross into the United States anyway, and if they can elucidate a fear of return to their home country, asylum law says you have the right to stay in the United States and present your claim to someone to ask to stay in the United States for your own physical protection. That is a law no matter how you got here. And there's no limitation on that. There's no numerical limitation on that. There was a bill proposed last year to put a numerical limitation on that, and Congress chose not to pass that law at that time. Again, I think that was a political issue, but that was something that if Congress really wanted to limit, they could have done that, but they chose not to do that. And continuing with following the law, last year there was that CBP border app, CBP One app, I think that it was called, where the Biden administration tried to limit that flow of people coming across by saying, you stay outside of the United States, you download this app, you put your information in there, we're going to meter people coming in, we're going to allow you to present your claim, and people were waiting outside the United States, living on the streets for months and months and months at a time. All of those people that came through this this lawful process, that were allowed into the United States, they were inspected, they had their names, they had their pictures taken, they had their fingerprints taken. Those people that are going to court now are the ones that are showing up to court, and the Department of Homeland Security is dismissing their cases and ICE is picking them up. So how is that following the rule of law? It isn't. In my mind, because these people followed what they thought were the lawful process by waiting outside the United States, downloading the app, going through this process, and now they don't have the opportunity to go forward with their case. So there are so many different kinds of programs. We can't just say, every immigrant is going to be treated this way. But specifically with asylum, that's just something that's been difficult.
Briefly, Jessica, 'cause I want to ask you a quick follow-up. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to touch on the asylum entry. We know that is a legal way to enter. However, we also know that asylum is abused, it's overused, and less than 2% of the cases actually are authentic or genuine, because illegal immigrants are being told, skip the border and enter through the asylum process. So it's actually created a backlog in the court system, because their asylum is escaping the country because of fear of persecution from your government. Most of them are trying to come here for work. It's not because they're fearful of their government. There's just no jobs. So that's what I'm saying, is even advocates on that side of the coin are sharing bad information to use asylum as a backdoor or a loophole to get into this country. And very few of those cases are ever heard.
I have a different question I want to ask, but we have about 30 seconds to break, Margarita. Why don't you take us to break and respond to what Justin just said?
I think that's probably true as far as the grant rate of asylum cases is probably very low, and it is very country specific. So the asylum cases that come from our southern border are probably less granted than in other cases, but you still have the right to due process to present your claim. And I agree that cases should be heard faster. But there aren't the resources for that, where they're being diverted elsewhere.
Okay, that's experienced immigration attorney Margarita Silva. Also with us is Justin Harris, Vice Chair of the Border Security Alliance. He's been in law enforcement for 30 years. With Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein. We're coming to the close pretty soon of this ABC 15 KTAR News Special, Immigration in Arizona Today. Welcome back with ABC 15's Nick Ciletti. I'm Steve Goldstein. We're joined for the last few minutes of the program by Margarita Silva, Valley immigration attorney. She's practiced law for 30 years. Her areas of focus are deportation, defense, and family immigration. Also with us is Justin Harris, Vice Chair of the Border Security Alliance, an organization advocating for policies that secure the border and combat human trafficking, drug smuggling, and other criminal actions along the border. He's served in law enforcement for 30 years. Margarita, let me ask you, one thing that Justin brought up that I find very interesting is that there are people who would certainly agree with what he's saying, that there are so many laws on the books that are not necessarily being properly enforced. How important do you think that is? Is there an aspect of just making sure that people know what the laws are, to make sure that people are, I guess, can I use an old phrase, which is sort of all singing from the same hymnal. Like everyone at least agrees on like what's going on here. Is that an issue that there are laws in the books that need to be better enforced?
Sure. I mean, there are laws, and not just immigration laws anywhere. I mean, you know, Valley freeways, right? You see speeders all the time. It used to be, you know, as long as you were under 10 miles an hour, you weren't going to get stopped. And you don't see that anymore. And we're not stopping all of those people anymore. So, yeah, there are laws, including immigration laws, that could be enforced more. But it's not being done.
But does that make a difference to you in terms of what when Justin says these are Trump immigration policies? He's certainly been more direct and more aggressive about enforcing them. But does that put us in a tougher place to find common ground if there is that feeling of, well, just enforce the old one, or no, we need to have these new ones in as well?
No, I definitely think the immigration laws need to be. The whole immigration law needs to be reformed, I believe. The current laws are very, very old. They focused on a different time in American history. They focused on different needs. And I think there could be definitely a whole overhaul focusing on not just family, but also employment-based immigration. So I think that needs to be done as well.
I have a question for both of you, but Justin, I want to give you a chance to respond to what she's saying.
Well, I agree with everything she's saying. Is, you know, I don't know if it's comprehensive reform, but maybe a few tweaks here or there. But the real issue that we got to address right away is making sure that everybody clearly understands the rules, follows the rules. This is a country built on not just laws, but the rule of law and enforcement of those laws. If we don't enforce the laws that are on the books, none of this matters. So we can talk about comprehensive reform, all kinds of change, but if the rule of law isn't being adhered to and if those policies are not being enforced, none of it matters. And we just came out of 4 years of that where there was a blind eye turned to a lot of people coming in through our borders, and that is a matter of national security. So as long as the rule of law is adhered to and the people that want to come here legally understand what those rules are and they follow those rules, I think this could be a much better process.
Well, if I can respond.
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
If I can respond to that. So, again, the law is maybe what someone says it is. And speaking of, you know, following the rule of law, I'm not just talking about the people who came in through the CBP One app, but let's talk about the people that were in court that had their cases dismissed. And everybody that went to court over on 7th Avenue in Van Buren, where the immigration court is, most of them had already been screened twice by an immigration official. Once when they were detained by ICE, and that agent decided, or whatever, to let them go. And if they didn't, that person then saw an immigration judge who then decided to let that person out because they were trustworthy enough to come to court on their own. So that person is following the law. They did what they were supposed to do. Again, they were screened at least once or twice already by an immigration official. They were going to court to address their issue, and now they're being detained. So as far as following the rule of law, you know, we would all like that in a perfect world, but it's not being executed that way.
Go ahead.
I'd have a couple questions. And one is, detained doesn't mean deported. So they were detained.
Sure.
My question is, why? That's what's missing in a lot of these discussion pieces. Why were they detained at court? Nobody seems to know the answer, but people automatically equate that to being deported, and that's not true.
I think there's a lot of confusion in the process, though. Is that right?
Yeah, there definitely is. And most of those people that were detained at that time were detained because their cases were dismissed by the Department of Homeland Security, because once the case was dismissed and they did not have a case pending, ICE was able to pick them up. And so they didn't get their due process, to me, was the bottom line of that. And that's, you know, besides following the rule of law, we want people to have due process. We want them to have their day in court. These people did not get it.
Well, if they saw an immigration agent and then an attorney and then had the case dismissed, that's two forms of checks and balances. So it sounds to me like, isn't that due process?
They did not have their asylum claims heard. Right.
Thank you for bringing up the word asylum. That's what I was trying to get out of her.
Right.
Because they probably determined, again, I'm assuming, that their cases didn't fit within the asylum requirement, so they were dismissed and detained.
No, that's not why. So the judge is the one that should have that decision, or the asylum official. So ICE agents are not asylum officials. So there are asylum officials. These people did not. And again, I'm specifically speaking of the ones that came in through the CBP One app. They did not have a chance to have their claims heard.
But you said they were in court, and in court they had their case dismissed. ICE agents aren't in court dismissing them. That's a judge.
No, well, the Department of Homeland Security, which are the government attorneys, dismissed the case, knowing that the people were going to be picked up outside the courtroom.
I'm a little
I think
confused.
they dropped the case.
Yes.
They didn't
Yeah.
dismiss the case. They dropped the case. The
Correct.
judges, you're right, can dismiss it.
Right.
This was
Yeah.
the case for the
With our remaining moments, I would like to. I'll start with you, Justin. 'Cause you brought up a good point but the last segment, talking about the resources. You being in law enforcement, and then I also want to ask you as well, Margarita. But you being in law enforcement, where is the need? Talk to us about the resources that would really support law enforcement and really help everyone in the long run.
Well, let me be very clear. In law enforcement, we have zero tolerance. We have zero ability to enforce federal law. We don't do that at all. We only enforce state and local laws. But for the folks that are coming over here, there needs to be a lot more federal judges hired to hear these immigration cases to help expedite their hearings. But local law enforcement, back in 2000, if we arrested anybody for a crime that was either a state or a local violation, one of those questions was, are you here legally? We don't even ask those questions anymore because local law enforcement does not want to get involved in federal immigration policy at all, because what local law enforcement cares about is the safety within the community. We don't care what your status is. What we care about is whether or not you're a victim or a criminal or a suspect, and we treat everybody the same. We're not here to differentiate between your status illegally, legally, American citizen. If you commit a state or local crime, we're going to arrest you, and we're not going to ask those questions because we want the victims to feel safe. We want the witnesses to know that they can speak to local law enforcement to participate in the criminal investigation. We don't want to scare anybody. Local law enforcement is here for our communities. We're here for the people, regardless of their status, and I want to be very clear about that.
Margarita, how do you see it? Where would you like to see more resources allocated?
Well, obviously, I think I would like the immigration enforcement, which is what our segment here is about, to be focused on dangerous criminals, people who are national security risks. Obviously, like Justin already knows, law enforcement does have priorities, right? You can't pull over everyone who speeds, but you're going to focus on, the DUI or somebody that you're specifically looking for. And I'm seeing that's actually not happening right now. I am having some immigration cases where the respondents, meaning the people who are going through court, are dreamers. They're protected by deferred action, so they physically cannot be deported. Yet the Department of Homeland Security is opening cases to put them in the deportation court, taking up more time from other cases that could be heard, like asylum cases. And so now, they're going to be going through years of hearings when they can't be deported because they already have deferred action. So, what we're hearing, or the message that's going out, they're going after criminals and dangerous people as a priority. I don't see that happening actually in day-to-day on the ground.
We'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Immigration attorney Margarita Silva, Justin Harris, Vice Chair of the Border Security Alliance. Covered a lot of ground over this hour and 45 minutes, Nick.
A robust conversation, I think. Obviously, we know we're not going to solve all the problems in this, but I think having the dialogue is a great place to start.
This has been a KTAR ABC 15 special Immigration in Arizona Today. For Nick Ciletti, I'm Steve Goldstein. Thank you so much for listening.